You are listening to Fantha Tracks.
Because of the following special program, Wonder Woman and the Incredible Hulk will not be presented this evening.
It's time to get all your Star Wars news in a single file. This is Making Tracks. Here are your hosts, Mark Newbold and Mark Mulcaster.
That's not true. That's impossible.
Hello and welcome to Making Tracks Reaction Chat for Episode 4 of Andor. After narrowly escaping Primal security, Cassian and Luthen escape off-planet and head to Aldhani, where Luthen offers Cassian the chance to make 200,000 credits and hit the Empire where it really hurts, in their pocketbook. Luthen tells Vel to take Andor and add him to her heist crew who are planning a daring raid on the Imperial garrison. Meanwhile, Luthen heads back to the galactic capital of Coruscant to meet up with Senator Mon Mothma. Also on Coruscant, we're introduced to Dedra Meero, an ISB officer whose gut tells her that the Staff Path unit that Cassian stole is part of a wider rebel plot in her sector. With the Empire seizing control of a Primor corporation and a new and keen to impress ISB agent starting to join the dots, what could this mean for Luthen and Cassian Andor? Episode 4 of Andor, titled Aldhani, picks up where Episode 3 left off, and once again, I'm joined by Mark Newbold, who's here to give us his thoughts and reaction to this episode of Andor. Mark, welcome back, and let's jump right in with your overall thoughts on this week's episode.
I've really been looking forward to talking about this one, not because the first three weren't excellent, world building, laying out the characters, setting up the scenarios and everything else, but this is the one where it really feels like we're shifting gears, we're moving location, we're going to Coruscant, which is a place that's always fantastic to go to, and I think mostly because we get to see the Imperial machine working, the daily, the sort of the daily grind of what the Empire does to keep this galactic institution ticking over, and that's what I found fascinating. So this one really, I think people will be digging into this one for weeks, months and beyond. I thought it was fascinating.
On the first chance that I watched this, which is literally only about 10 minutes ago, there is a lot of, I'm going to use a word, a lot of Easter eggs. And I don't mean like obvious ones, but lots of little bits of kind of world building and joining the dots up and, you know, planet names and kind of little references to previous events and stuff, which actually just helps really make this feel authentic. But also where this episode really starts to zing is the fact that we had those first 3 episodes. It kind of sets up who Andor is, where he is in the galaxy at the moment, and where the galaxy is at present. And from this point on, we're now going to see how his interactions with Luthen, and obviously Luthen's interactions with Mon Mothma, and Mon Mothma's interactions with the Senate, how they all start to affect one another and coalesce and start to lead us towards this galactic civil war. For me, if this is going to be the path that this series takes, where we're going to have like 3 episode blocks, and the first 2 episodes don't really have much in the way of action, shall we say, but then the third part of that block has all the action, then I'm okay with that, because what we got, I felt, was just really strong performances throughout from the whole cast. This whole view of Coruscant and the Imperial machine that we haven't actually seen on screen before, which is fantastic.
Yeah, I think also the way the characters played out, Dedra Meero's obviously the main ISB character that's starting to sniff out all these things. And her equals, if you like, have got a bit more tenure than her, but her superior, the boss in the room, you can see how they think. You can see that they don't go on gut instinct. They're just going on numbers. He's most impressed by her capture figures being higher than the quota should have been and stuff like that. So you can kind of see that even though clearly Vader's out there doing stuff and the Emperor's aware of pockets of stuff, at this point, they're probably not realising at that level, the top level, the Vader in his castle and Mustafar and the Emperor wherever he would be. Yeah, they don't know the scope of this unification that's on the cusp of happening. And it's people on the ground like Dedra Meero who is starting to see the bits, the way she figures out the Star Path scenario and wanting to get more information and being blocked at every turn because they're so backstabbing ambitious that they can't see beyond the end of the noses. So I wouldn't if Darth Vader turned up in the next episode. Of course, I'm thrilled. If the Emperor turns up in the next episode, I'm going to be absolutely enthralled. But my gut tells me you're probably not even. It's not even going to reach their ears until season 2, a couple of years in, because this episode, Aldhani, really feels like it's setting the stall for how the Empire deal with their internal politics.
I really liked how the ISB general kind of explains that, they're not there for security. They're there to diagnose the cancerous element that is causing the unrest in the galaxy. I really like that analogy. It's surgical. It makes it very precise. Like you say, it's about not necessarily going on your gut, which is obviously, I guess, where Daedra is, because I think, he mentions that she's come in from enforcement.
Yeah.
So let's assume that's policing. And therefore, you find out people do tend to rely on their gut instincts a little bit more, but they're like, no, this is going to be analysis, hard facts, numbers and stuff. And we know from just history, let alone from intergalactic history, when you rely on just cold, hard facts and numbers, sometimes it gives you a skewed picture, and it normally means that you react too late because you don't see what's actually happening until the numbers are in front of you. We've got 2 characters on Coruscant now in place that could probably team up and work with each other. Daedra, who is ambitious and she's pushing up inside of ISB, but then you've got Cyril Khan, who's basically now just been kicked out or made redundant, and you wonder how those two are going to potentially work together, because I kind of think, by bringing him back to Coruscant, you've put him in place for him to be useful again. Now, I don't think he's going to go join the Empire, because I don't think he's going to have time to go through all the ranks, but it could be about those two meet and they team up, because I think they've probably got a very similar outlook. Both of them got some personal stake in this now. So it'd be interesting to see if those two can end up meeting up and moving forward in the later episodes.
With the way the Empire have set their stall out, it feels like we know from history that, for example, Admiral Motti puts his head above the parapet, gets force choked.
Yeah.
Admiral Ozzel makes one mistake, gets killed by Vader. These high-ranking Imperials, that's ahead of where we are now, of course, but they clearly realise that the more attention you draw to yourself, the less likely you are to advance in life, let alone in career. So they've got their box-ticking exercises, and they're just making sure the quotas are met, and they're making sure that they impress within their own circles, but they're not drawing too much attention to themselves. Now, Daedra Miro is an ambitious go-getter, which is fine. That feels incongruous in the circumstances of where these people are. It almost feels like it doesn't fit. She hasn't got any heft of command. She's been there, what was it, they said 6 months or something,
Yeah.
And she, like you say, she was brought in from another area of the Empire. All they can see is somebody trying to make a power play to get a bit more power and a bit more. It's Game of Thrones, isn't it? So they're all trying to get that little edge on the other guy, where really, I think, just from first impressions of her character, she's actually invested in wanting to find out where these pockets of rebellion are and how they're coalescing. And she's looking at the bigger picture. She's not just looking at the numbers. It's like Neo looking at the Matrix, isn't it? Everybody else looks at the Matrix, so they just see the numbers. Neo sees the picture. She's kind of starting to see the picture of, well, that matches that, and that star path has come from there, but he won't let me look into it because it's in one of his 6 sectors, not one of my 2. You can see already that's where their downfall is going to be. They're so arrogant. With Cyril, he's got his issues. He's gone back to his mom. He's had the slap in the face. Will be interesting to see how that plays out, because that was quite the scene.
We start to see again, like he gets into the lift and he has to descend quite, a few levels, not like ridiculous. I don't think we're anywhere near like 13.
It's quite the metaphor for his career though, wasn't it?
Pretty much, yeah. And I just loved that, how he was kind of carrying like that briefcase and what looked like a record box holder. I was just like, well, at least he got his record collection back, if nothing else. So there's some really great ideas in this episode, and, they talk about Andor being on Mimban at the same time, really, that Solo was. And, Cassian's kind of like, I was one of the 50 that survived Mimban. And then Luthen kind of says, well, yeah, that's because 1, you're a cook, and 2, you kind of fled.
Yeah.
I expect, if it's not by Christmas, like sometime in the new year, we should be getting a Andor Solo Mimban-based comic adventure. That's my one speculation. But also, they're given all these examples of how occupying forces colonize places. They get the the locals to kind of basically fight against each other, and then they kind of come in, quell the unrest.
Yeah.
And like when we see in Aldhani, you know, they kind of almost wiped out the identity of the planet by moving everybody kind of to the lowlands and then damming that river, which is around this temple and that. So you strip the identity of the area you want to colonize, so to speak, and then you can kind of recreate that itself. So it's very interesting how they're really subtly putting in these big sweeping ideologies for what the Empire's doing in a way which is just so matter of fact and not, oh, the Empire's come in and just destroyed us all and that. And, you know, they kind of kept it pretty much like, I guess, like if you're almost a Ukrainian at the moment, like, well, the Russians are here. I can't fight them, so we just got to roll with it. I thought that was fascinating, really.
You look at the Empire and they are kind of trying to create a monoculture. They're not bothered about indigenous cultures. Mon Mothma talks about the day, I think it was the Day of Days or something on Chandrila. It's her husband's day, and she's buying the present for him from Luthen, obviously, as a cover for their conversation. And she's clearly living in great opulence, very wealthy. Don't know quite how they've got that wealth at this particular point, but that's where she is on Coruscant. But you see these elements of culture being wiped out, ignored, washed away. And you get to the end of the episode. I mean, we're skipping around the episode, but you get to the end of the episode when I sort of wrote them down as the Magnificent Seven. Those guys in Aldhani are going to make the attack, get that quarterly payroll and work that plan. One of the characters says, well, you know, there used to be thousands coming into the valley, but now it's kind of sad. There's not as many. And you can just see the erosion of culture.
Yeah.
And seeing that aspect of it in this episode and flipped across to Coruscant, which is always a joy to visit, and seeing how they deal with just the nuts and bolts, and there's no humanity to what they're doing. And these people, what was it on one of the reports when they said, oh, they've even spelt ferrix wrong.
Just don't care.
They're blithe about everything. Yeah, they don't care, literally don't care.
Hello, I'm Ahmed Best, and you're listening to Fantha Tracks.
You know, that's probably a really stark contrast, I think, from the first 3 episodes. We basically had people who were grifting, you could say, they were the have-nots. And then, you know, we see Mon Mothma rock up in this really shiny, overly shiny, metallic Cadillac of an airspeeder, wearing pristine cream, and it's all very couture. You know, the costumes in this episode on Coruscant were absolutely amazing.
Yeah.
The complete opposite to what we've seen for the last 3 episodes of these people have got a lot of money. When she walks into her house and she's walking through, you know, I don't even say it's a house. It was more like a, I guess, penthouse kind of suite or something like that. But I said to Karen, I was like, where's all the clutter? Where's all the crap? It's just pristine, you know. And this is somebody who, clearly is very affluent. And in US politics, you have to be pretty well off to run as senator and governors and stuff, just because of the amount of money it takes to actually do the campaigns.
Yeah.
You know, even from the get-go, she's talking about protecting the rights of the people from Gorman. That was the episode of Rebels where she kind of outed herself, wasn't it?
Yeah.
That's the one where she addressed the other rebel kind of cells and stuff and said it's time to kind of stand up. So we hear the start of the issues on Gorman with them blocking their ship lane. Now we know where it's going to lead. It's going to lead with this kind of Imperial massacre in like 4.5 years' time. You know, you mentioned the archaeologist. Did you pick up on the Indiana Jones Easter egg?
I had a look around because you kind of see...
there's loads of stuff.
There's Plo Koon's face things in there. There's Mando armor in there. It's a bit like Dryden Voss's ship, isn't it? There's loads of stuff in there.
I think it was even more, because like there was a Wookiee helmet, Starkiller's kind of helmet as well, Gungan shield, and in the back room... On the shelf, there's a holocron, and I think it looked like a Sith holocron as well, which is quite interesting.
Didn't spot that.
And it's very fleeting, and I mean, I had to pause it to kind of work it out. He had 3 or 4 half blocks of carbonite, and in the front one, it looked like there was a whip curled up. I wonder if that is like a nod, Easter egg to it towards like Harrison Ford. He was in the carbonite, and also obviously he's playing Indiana Jones in that.
That's a good spot. Because like you say, she lives in this opulence and wealth, and she's a senator, so she's not going to be scrabbling around, obviously, especially being on Coruscant. You've got people like Cassian and his ilk who have struggled and scrabbled and scratched and scraped to get by on what they've got. You've seen Marva's house, you've seen where Cassian's lived, you've seen poor old B2 battered to bits, and the rough time that they've had from when she picks him up at the beginning on his homeworld. Looks like her and Clem, her husband, they're obviously roguish characters. Not pirates, but, you know, they're opportunists, let's say. It's probably the best way to describe
they're scavengers, aren't
but
they? They're like with salvagers.
Yeah, but that ship's not too bad. They look like they're doing okay. Time moves on, Clem's not around, so so we can only assume something happens to him or he's left. Not an easy life on Ferrix. And then you look at Mon Mothma and you think, well, just because, for example, Cassian has got basically nothing and is stealing and scrabbling around, and Mothma, in a material sense, has got pretty much everything, we don't know whether the wealth is from her side of the family, whether the wealth is from her, as my wife put it, twat of a husband, parents' side of the family. You don't know, and that's not really relevant at this point. The fact is that they're at total opposite ends of the social scale. Essentially, they want exactly the same thing. I found that really compelling as well.
And I tell you what, I hope next week's episode we get to see that dinner party.
Yes.
Bearing in mind that Sly Moore's going to be there and Ars Dangor is going to be there, who obviously work for the Emperor. Yeah. Interestingly, if I'm right in thinking, Sly Moore's got some kind of force sensitivity as well. So you wonder if we're going to see that she picks up on something from Mon Mothma. This has got the makings of being like one of those really tense and slightly awkward dinner parties that hopefully, if they cover it right, it will just zing. This week's episode is anything to go by. I think the verbal dueling and sparring will be amazing if we get that scene.
I could be wrong, but I think in the latest Darth Vader run, Sly Moore was sort of involved with Vader. She was sort of trying not to tip her hand too much, and obviously that's beyond this.
Well, she tries to take him down, doesn't
exactly.
she?
And so she's still around, she's still playing her games, and she kind of gets caught out and so on. So there's that. But obviously, as you say, Ars Dangor as well, which was from Jedi, but I think it's a deleted scene, so I don't know if it ever became completely canonical, but this presumably goes back and fixes, inverted commas, fixes that. But yeah, totally agree. We had the whole Godfather-style scene in Book of Boba Fett, in Boba's palace, when he's meeting all the other sort of gang leaders and trying to come to some arrangement. So you had a scene of that ilk, but very different. This, given how expertly it's been performed by the actors and how well it's been shot so far in general, I really hope we get a scene like that presumably in the next episode, to see them all sort of playing chess, because it is almost like the scene in Luthen's shop on Coruscant when he obviously puts the wig on, practices his hand movements. I know Stellan Skarsgård had said, a lot of the change in the two characters was in the hands. So you actually see him moving his hands around, getting into character. And what he's saying loudly is one thing, what he's meaning is completely something else. So there was an interesting little sleight of hand happening there. And because Coruscanti politics can be quite subtle, it'll be interesting to see if that gets played out at the dinner table.
And actually, one thing that I thought was quite interesting was something that Cassian said, how you wear their clothes and walk in and act as if you belong, and you can take whatever you want. That's what basically Luthen's doing right now. And you see the disgust. He puts on the wig and that, and he puts on the clothes and the rings, practices his gesture, but then he does it for a couple of seconds, and then that whole facade just kind of drops, and you can kind of see the disgust of what he's had to do, and he just walks off back into the cockpit. And so I thought that was a really interesting analogy, but actually, we've had Cassian come to that same conclusion, has done it in a very literal, probably slightly more direct way. To be fair, he is very much the blunt instrument. He's like the Daniel Craig, James Bond in the Star Wars universe. Yeah. I thought, wow, okay, that's quite in itself. But actually, the thing I really liked about this, they're kind of talking slightly in double speak. Mon Mothma mentions that she's potentially found somebody else that she could bring into the circle, into the cause. Who do you think that is? Is Bail Organa the obvious or maybe too obvious a choice? Or
I'd like it if it wasn't, but given that the whole point of Andor, but a good chunk of the point of Andor is to lead you into Rogue One, and clearly Bail's in Rogue One. I'd be surprised if it wasn't, and it would make sense. And obviously coming off the back of Kenobi as well, where a lot of stuff there, it's played a lot less intense, but now we're at the tipping point. I think you mentioned Rebels earlier on. I think Rebels and Andor are set at around about the same time. They're just sort of within 5 years of A New Hope. So, season one is in that ballpark, and Bail is in Rebels, isn't he? So, there's stuff going on there. So it would make sense in terms of that. And I don't know, Leland Cheese, the guy to ask, I'm curious as to where the overlaps are, because with the first 4 episodes of Andor, it's pretty sequential. I don't think we had any flashbacks in this one.
No flashbacks.
Pretty linear. So
thankfully.
Yeah. And I like the flashbacks. It gave you some sense of where Cassian has come from. But now he's off Ferrix and the story's moving on. It's interesting, the parallels.
For everything in one location, daily news, reviews, interviews, podcasts, video, and social media feeds, bookmark fanthatracks.com for Star Wars news 24/7, 365.
caring, her husband, clearly entitled, not a political man, kind of likes jabbing and sparring with her. And she's quite happy to bounce it back because, for goodness sake, she stands up in the Senate and argues political matters. But I'm very interested to see how that develops because of all the places and people that you would want to have you back in private, it's your partner.
Yeah.
The sense already is that she can't confide in him. He is just a bit of a fop. He basically says, oh, why do you have to be so boring? Politics, oh, God. He doesn't care who's in power. As long as he's rich and he's got access to cool stuff.
I think he's a kept man.
Yes.
I think I don't think he has to do anything. I would probably guess it was either like family wealth that either he's inherited or it's all her kind of wealth and maybe he was successful, but then as they had to move to Coruscant, he just flits about. And I mean, the fact that he calls Sly Moore Thun.
Yeah.
It's kind of like, that probably does sum up actually the kind of like, how was your day kind of conversations he has with her on a day-to-day basis. I mean, to be honest, I don't even think until this episode that I was even aware that Mon Mothma was married. No. I don't even think that's something that has ever been discussed.
Certainly in Legends, but I think in canon they'd established that she'd got children, but they'd never given any detail to her husband. And reading a couple of the interviews with Tony Gilroy, I think he says there's parallels between her and Padme. Padme was queen at 14, and if I remember, Mothma went into the Senate when she was 19. But nevertheless, Mothma's marriage to Perrin was essentially an arranged marriage, and I think she was sort of 16. But this is Star Wars. There's different expectations, different cultural mindsets, so it's difficult to criticise it too much without knowing enough about it. She certainly doesn't in any way seem subservient to him, but she sure as hell seems frustrated by him. So that dinner party, whilst the political side of it, on one hand, is going to be really interesting, and I can't wait for the next reaction chat to dig into that. If we get it, I'm making assumptions, I'm hoping we get it, that him at one end of the table and her at the other, just to look down the table at them two, the daggers that's going to be flying between the two, could be really interesting. But it might not happen, that's our supposition.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose that's the thing. It might just happen in like passing comment or something. But do we think that we're going to get the heist next week, or do you reckon that heist is going to be reserved for episode 6?
There's always a danger in making these assumptions, and I'll step outside the Star Wars galaxy for 1 second to last week's episode of She-Hulk, where the previous episode you saw Daredevil's helmet in the box, and everyone thought, great, Daredevil next episode. It wasn't. It was that inconvenient wedding episode. And maybe this week we'll get the Daredevil episode, but I kind of hope we don't. I'm hoping they hold that back. But yeah, while they said that the mission that they were planning, the heist, was only 3 days away, Cassian's now gone away with a couple of data pads. He's got to learn some Aldhani phrases. He's got to learn the layout of the base. He's got to learn how to fly the ship. He's got plenty of stuff to swat up on. Yeah, I think it probably will be the next episode. Feels like it's a Dirty Dozen in and out type mission, but just there going to Aldhani in their highlands on that world, literally shot in the Highlands of Scotland. That sequence was fascinating as well. Just the desolation of they dive for cover from 2 TIE fighters, and then straight away she says, "Don't worry, they won't come around again today. They're just flying around, so they've got something to do." Even phrases like that just show you the scope of the Empire, the breadth and depth of the Empire. How on earth they managed to control it. If it wasn't such a fascist regime, you'd kind of be like, that's kind of impressive.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of get where you're coming from. Admittedly, I think if there was somebody who just happened to walk into the lounge whilst I was watching this episode and saw the scene of them walking to the camp, I would have thought they would have been easily mistaken, and rightly so, to think that maybe I was either watching Willow or Game of Thrones.
Yes.
If you just take that scene or that that environment out of context, out of Star Wars, it felt so un-Star Wars, it makes it Star Wars.
There's some things where it's obviously meant to feel like Star Wars and it misses the mark, and you don't have to miss the mark by much for it to feel just so wrong. But with this, because there's so many elements that are really out there, but the tone of it feels very consistent to me anyway, as a Star Wars fan, and just things we've watched over the years, different elements of things we've seen over the years, and mentions of things like you say, there's Easter eggs galore in this. I mean, Arvala 6 gets mentioned. Quill was on Arvala 7 in Mandalorian, and there's just lots of these little... Mimban gets mentioned again from Splinter of the Mind's Eye and Solo, and there's just all these little mentions which are cool because they little waypoints. But if you just walked in and just saw those two guys walking down the hill back towards the encampments and you didn't know that was Andor, or indeed any Star Wars, you'd be like, oh, what are you watching? Because it's just that inverted commas real world feel to it. There's going to be thousands, literally more than thousands, hundreds and hundreds of thousands of worlds that are so unremarkable, M-class, breathable atmosphere planets that will be deserts or will be forests or will be like this, like highlands.
Star Trek reference.
I know, I'm sorry. But I really liked that feel about it. You know, it really gave it a grittiness, which Andor is delivering in spades.
AK-47s aside,
yes,
or AK-74s, depending on who you argue with, I really like the makeup of this kind of crew as well. I mean, I think that the young, naive and idealistic kid who kind of doesn't vouch, but he kind of goes, yeah, I think Cassian's okay. I don't reckon he's walking out of this heist. He's the one that dies, and that just pushes Andor a little bit further down the trajectory that he's going to end up heading. You know, because this is a kid who's there more for the cause rather than, you know, for the money. And I think actually all of them are, aren't they?
Yeah.
It's only Andor who is, as far as we know, getting paid.
Getting big bucks as well.
Absolutely.
Minimum 50k for that kyber crystal. 200,000 if he survives.
Precisely. And you know, and that in itself is interesting because we've seen 2 or 3 times in Andor already kyber crystals. And, you know, obviously this is kind of obviously tying into the Jedi mysticism that is more prevalent in Rogue One, but it's saying Jedi without having to say Jedi, which I think is not necessarily a bad thing, because it looks like it's a meld, isn't it? It's like half a kyber crystal and half a star stone or something. I think it was, and that kyber crystal is coloured, so you'd think that's actually come out of like a Jedi lightsaber, you know, because they don't normally have a colour, isn't it, until they're paired with a Jedi.
They bleed them in that, yeah.
Exactly. So could Luthen be some kind of Jedi? I don't think so. Or, you know, has he got some kind of connection? And clearly I think he has, because ultimately he gives it to Andor as a way to say, not only am I giving you this because I trust you, I'm trusting you to come back, i.e. I believe in you enough that you will come back.
That did feel like a nice Jeddah link, though, because when Cassian goes to Jeddah in Rogue One, he seems quite familiar with, you know, the Guardians of the Wills and the whole way that the city works. And I just wonder, because, like you pointed out, a very clear touchstone to Rogue One via the Kyber Crystal, which is where it really gets prominence, if you like, in that film, that maybe I mean, Scarif got a mention in there somewhere today. I can't remember exactly where, but Scarif gets a shout. It was
ISB, wasn't it? Because they're moving more resources to Scarif.
So that was a neat mention. I don't know if we'll go to Scarif, but I think we might go to Jeddah. That's a possibility to sort of seed what we see in Rogue One. And going back to what you said earlier, you know, about Bale coming into it if he's the other guy, it's another platform of the story of Rogue One. It's another link to that film. It's bolstering it. But Tony Gilroy has said he's been a busy lad, he's done a lot of interviews. In one of them, you know, he did say that you will definitely look at Rogue One and the actions of the people within it very differently. And I still think that going right back, and I don't know if I said this in a previous reaction chat, so I'll say it now, that ship that Casa was on as a kid with all the illness, you know, the yellow jaundiced bodies of all those dead, I think they were Confederacy. I think they were separatists, wasn't they? There was a separatist ship. I think Cassian at some point is going to learn. I think Cassian would have took that "you're going to die" death mission to Scarif and happily died on the beach, knowing that it succeeded, because I think Cassian's time's up. I think Cassian's ill from being on that vehicle. I think that's why Marva is quite slow and old. I think it affected them. I think you're going to find Clem probably died from being on that ship. I think that ship is like a plague ship. And I think Cassian got enough of it that it's just shortened his life. And that's why he's kind of got a death wish. You know, he'll dive into these situations because he's not destined to live forever. He's never going to be an old man. That's just my gut feeling. Could be completely wrong.
To be fair, at this point, it's completely open.
Doesn't Bix mention at some point, or is it B2, about getting the meds for Marva in the first episode, about getting her meds? You know, she's not well either.
Yeah, Marva's not particularly well, because he keeps on talking about having to keep her warm or something, or stay warm. That might just be like, you know, she's just really tight with the electricity, because she seems to have a heater like, right close to her.
That's
but
right.
It doesn't seem to be kind of heating the whole place. On the second viewing, I was like, oh, actually, yeah, you can really see that yellow, horrible kind of mustard gas type kind of like vapor just kind of escaping. Yeah, you could be completely right. Who knows?
Who knows?
I mean, I'm thinking that now that the Empire is here to stay on Ferrix, we're going to obviously see Cassian come back, and potentially that's where he gets Bix off. He does a heist, and I think at some point or another this season, he goes back to Ferrix and he kind of pulls off his friends, rescues them from the Empire. That's where I think this is heading at some point in this season, I think.
Yeah, because he does say to Brasso, doesn't he, I'll be back, and I've got to go, but I'll be back. So yeah, you'd like to think there's more of B2 and Marva and such. So I think this heist is the next triple episode chunk. Get this bit done, and we're halfway through the opening season by the end of that.
Hello, my name is Aidan Cook, and you're listening to Fantha Tracks.
All of it's been tremendously impressive, from the visuals, from the design. The look of Coruscant was so in step with what we've seen before in the best way. Can't wait to now get into the Senate. I want to be in that Senate room again, like we were in the prequels, because I never thought we'd be in there again. It felt like that was something that was probably, after the Emperor and Yoda went at it, was probably wrecked, destroyed, left empty, abandoned. Oh, actually, no, that's the Senate. It's another thing that you can look at A New Hope now when Leia's talking about the Senate, and without thinking of the Senate from the prequels and just making our own assumptions, it's like, no, actually, that's what it was. So it's just another little layer of good stuff that bolsters what we've known with A New Hope for like 45 years.
Yeah, and I think actually we probably will see the Senate, and I reckon one of the things that we'll learn about Senate is that actually the Emperor doesn't go there.
Yeah.
It's all done by proxy, and this is why I'm kind of thinking that we might not see the Emperor at that kind of level. I think that he's mentioned, but he's not actually seen. We had quite a lot of Vader in Kenobi.
Yeah, and probably got Vader coming up in Ahsoka as well.
In some description, I think you're definitely right.
Yeah.
So, maybe this is a series that we don't have Vader. And again, to be fair, you just need to have him mentioned, and it suddenly just kind of like electrifies that scene.
Yeah.
When you get those little references, you're watching very new Star Wars, and then they mention something that's like very old Star Wars, and you go, "Oh my god!" Like the Rakatan like Empire and stuff like that. It's like that's from Knights of
the Old Republic. Yeah.
So far, and we are only quarter of the way through now. This is by far the best streaming series that we've had from Star Wars. Absolutely nothing wrong with any of the others, but this is, I think, so far, they talk about connective tissue and continuity and how, everything's connected. I think so far anyway, this has been the best example of that, done in such a way which isn't obvious, which either has to make you do your homework or just make you kind of like have to sit there and go, where have I heard that name again?
Yeah.
But it doesn't feel like it's done in a gatekeepery kind of way where it's like, if you want to know about that, you need to go and watch this, or, you need to go and, you should know this and what have you. It's kind of done in that world building way whereby it just feels organic, as if it is things that people would have said in that moment at that point in time.
Exactly.
And that for me is what is making me really excited about what we're going to get for the next few episodes.
Yeah, there's so many things that get mentioned, things that if you want to go and Wikipedia it or Google it, it's there. It's exposition to a degree, but because it's a franchise that we've followed for so long, like you say, you've just mentioned the Rakatan stuff. If you want to go and look for it, there it is. It gives you that little endorphin thrill. There's loads of stuff in there that's brand new, they've just pulled out of thin air, that has the same meaning to a newbie as something that we would have played on a PS1 30 years ago or whatever.
Exactly.
So it doesn't matter in that sense. And that's the great thing about levels of fandom and people coming in and learning stuff as they go. And I don't now feel the pressure. I don't know about you, but I used to feel pressure that I felt like I needed to know every character's name and I needed to know every actor's name.
No chance.
No, absolutely not. I don't even worry about it now. If it stays in my head, great. If not, I know I can find it in seconds and it'll come back to me, or it's right there on Disney Plus if I need to write something or research it or whatever. One of the beauties of your idea doing these reaction chats is that you've literally just watched it. I watched it again this morning. This was the 4th episode of that block that I got to see 6 weeks ago. So it's not, I'm fresh going forward as you are now. So it's nice to see it again with the benefit of having been able to talk about those first 3 episodes last week. This is a gut reaction show. And I'm just excited, more excited by this episode, weirdly, than the first 3, that so many doors now are potentially open, so many avenues we can now see of what's coming next week, what's coming the week after, where's this thing going to go, who's going to live, who's going to die, especially with Andor, you're thinking, Gilroy said it. He's got actors from season 1 that move on into season 2, and he's already told them, well, sorry, but you die in episode 15 and you die in episode 18. And he's already said that he's told actors this, you know. There is a sense that in the same way that Mando's kind of set up to be like the lone gunslinger character, and he's walking his own path, and if you come along for the ride, great, but this is me doing my thing. It feels like Andor is on a path that, regardless of what he wants, whether he wants to keep people safe like his adopted mother or friends like Bix or whoever, odds are that whoever you see in the final episodes of season 2 are probably most of the people you would expect to see because they're in Rogue One, like Merrick, like Draven and Dodonna, and obviously Mothma we know. But other characters, people that we're going to get to know really well over the next X amount of episodes, like Rogue One, because God knows not that many people walk away from Rogue One. There's probably a lot that ain't going to make it.
But hopefully 2 people that will make it is yourself and me. Fingers crossed.
Wouldn't that be nice?
Well, look, Mark, thanks very much for hopping on tonight. Everybody else, thank you very much for listening. Make sure you check out Tuesday's episode of Making Tracks and all the good news and reviews and everything else that Star Wars has thrown at us this week. So, Mark, can you let the good listeners know how they can get in touch if they want to drop us a comment, a thought or a theory about Andor or just Star Wars in general? Definitely,
because we've got loads of stuff going on Phantom at the moment. We've got the guides, we've got the group reviews, we've got reaction chats, we've got Good Morning Tatooine, so loads of avenues to talk about Andor. So anyone who's listening, please get a question in. Even if it's something you're pulling out of thin air, we'll talk about it. If you want to be a part of the action and stay updated on all the latest Star Wars news, visit panthertracks.com or check out the free
Tres, which is free in Spanish.
Panther Tracks app through the App Store to follow us on your mobile device. I've learnt something today. You can reach out to us and send in your listeners' questions by, as I just said, emailing radio@panthertracks.com. Comment, like and share on any of our social media feeds at Panther Tracks, and be sure to subscribe, leave a review, preferably a 5-star one, on Amazon Music, Audible, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, or your podcatcher or smart speaker of choice. And as always, thanks to James Semple for composing the Panther Tracks intro, Adam O'Brien for our Making Tracks opening music, and Mark Daniel and Vanessa Marshall for our voiceovers. Remember, tune in to Good Morning Tatooine. It's live most Sunday evenings, 9 o'clock UK time, 4 p.m. Eastern, 1 p.m. Pacific on Facebook and YouTube. And check out Panther Tracks Radio on Fridays at 7 o'clock UK time for new episodes of The Phantom from Down Under, Planet Layer, Desert Planet Discs, Start Your Engines, Collecting Tracks, Cannot Fodder, and special episodes of Making Tracks, of which there is one this week from Return of the Garrison. And every Tuesday at 7 o'clock UK time at 7 p.m. for your weekly episode of Making Tracks. And that's me done for this episode.
Good. I'm shattered now. That took ages to read it.
God, you're telling me.
Yeah. Brilliant. Well, look, dude, thank you very much. No doubt I will catch up with you very soon. And yeah, we will catch up with everybody else who's listening in a couple of days' time. So until then, stay safe, take care, and may the Force be with you.
Coming up next on Panther Tracks Radio, it's another episode of Making Tracks.